drugs became available which also controlled psychotic hallucinations and delusions. Those were called major tranquilizers, now called antipsychotics generally. What do antipsychotics do? They block dopamine. They block a neurochemical called dopamine. That's what all antipsychotics do. The basic core feature of an antipsychotic drug is they block dopamine. There are 3 dopamine systems in the brain. When antipsychotics were first invented, they blocked all dopamine. And as a result, you didn't only lose your hallucinations and your delusions, you also lost your motor function. And those tardive dyskinesias that those patients got was because one of the dopamine systems controls muscle tone, controls important automatized aspects of movement. So they gradually refined antipsychotics until they got the one that blocks the right kind of dopamine. And that's the dopamine that flows through this pathway. It's called the mesolimbic mesocortical dopamine pathway. The other one is the substantia nigra pathway up here. That's the one that you don't want to block. But this one here you do want to block with antipsychotics, and that's what they do. So, of course, Hobson disagreed. He said, well, I think it's the acetylcholine fibers going through that area. And so, again, the benefit of neuroscience is you can say, oh, do you really think that? Well, let's test it. You see, and so that's what we were able to do. With every method has its strengths and its weaknesses. The strength of neuroscience is you can say, you think this, I think that. Okay, let's do an experiment and see who's right. Which is something that's sorely lacking in our method, which has its own strengths, which at least enables us to explore this thing called the mind and show that that it exists and how it works and that feelings matter and all of that. And that it works, there are things called defenses, and that this actually alters how you behave, and so on. But it's hard to do little simple experiments like that. So if you block, here's the experiment. If you block dopamine in that with a drug, then you should stop dreams. If you increase dopamine with a drug, you should increase dreams. If you block acetylcholine with a drug, then you should not stop dreams, because it's not the acetylcholine. If you increase acetylcholine with a drug, it should not increase dreams, because dreams are not driven by acetylcholine. So those experiments were done. What we found was you block dopamine, you block dreaming. You increase dopamine, you increase dreaming. You increase everything we know about dreaming. You have more dreams, you have longer dreams, you have more emotionally intense dreams, you have more bizarre dreams, and you have more nightmares. Everything we measured was more when you increase dopamine. What about the acetylcholine? You block acetylcholine, which according to Hobson should result in less dreams, according to me should result in no change. What it actually did is it resulted in more dreams. It was even worse for Hobson, than I hoped. Anticholinergics, that is, acetylcholine blockers, which on his theory should result in a reduction or a cessation of dreaming, cause you to dream much more at night. Even during the day, you start dreaming. They get into a dreamlike state of mind. His theory is completely wrong, 100% wrong. Why? Because he didn't talk to his patients. Didn't bother to take psychological evidence as counting for anything. Subjective experience, you can just leave it out of account. And that's how you get so badly, how you go so badly astray.
Was he alive when you did this?
Oh, yes.
Did he accept it?
So Susan says, did he accept it? I'll just tell you a little side story here, because it's very interesting, because it affects the way when I said earlier, I don't disregard the sociological aspects of our standing in the world and so on. I think that's real. We might not like it. If you have an idealized view of how science works, that people are truth-loving and, you present them with the evidence and a reasoned argument, they will accept it. It's not at all how it works. This is what happened. Hobson invites me to go to Harvard to present my findings, which he'd heard about, which he'd read about. So I go there and I say, this is what I found. They say, really? I say, yeah, look, here's the scans, here's the this, these are the EEGs, look here, boom, boom, boom. Sorry, Alan, you're a nice old man, but here's the evidence. What can you do about it? Nothing. There it is. So Hobson and his students all sitting around him, It's a whole, he was like the professor of neurophysiology at Harvard. So, shit. It's true. It's obvious. Lesions there lead to a cessation of dreaming. There's no denying it. In fact, everyone else was observing the same thing now. Anyone who looks for patients with lesions there, they don't dream anymore. And by the way, what I didn't tell you is that dopamine, which increases dreaming like that, it has no effect on REM sleep. So these clearly are two completely separate things. So then I say to Alan Hobson at Harvard, what I didn't tell you, oh yes, I did, the vote. Remember the vote. So I said to him, Alan, maybe you owe Freud an apology. He says, why? Now I'll tell you why. I'm coming to answer your question. Remember I said this part of the brain. Well, already you can see partly why he owes Freud an apology, because he said, this shows Freud was wrong. Well, now we've showed Hobson was wrong, so therefore what Hobson showed, which is supposed to have showed that Freud was wrong, is irrelevant, because Hobson, what he showed, he didn't show. So at the very least, we're still left where we started. He hasn't disproven anything about psychoanalytical dream theory, but it's much worse than that for Hobson. This part of the brain, which, as I said, we've now identified, and it's gone beyond the chemical, giving and things that increase and double the output of the dopamine at the other end. There's no time during your sleep-wake cycle when you have more activity in this system than during dreaming sleep. Likewise, at this end, they've measured by a method called microdialysis how much dopamine is released. It's more than at any other time. So there's no doubt about it. This is the thing that generates the dreams. So what does this part of the brain do? This is what I'm coming to. Because this part of the brain generates dreams. What does it do? Well, it's known by, I told you the anatomical term for it, mesocortical mesolimbic dopamine system. It's known in behavioral neuroscience as the reward system by some people, like what's his name, Rolls, calls it the reward system, Edmund Rolls, in Oxford. Jaak Panksepp in Washington calls it the seeking system. Kent Berridge in Massachusetts, no? Doesn't matter where he is, but he calls it the wanting system. Reward, seeking, wanting. Other names for it are curiosity system, expectancy system, self-stimulation system is even another name for it. So, the common denominator of all these names tells you what this system does. This system is an appetite system. It's a desire system. If you stimulate that structure in any mammal, what it does is forage. It moves. It twitches its tail. It wiggles its whiskers. It sniffs. And it moves like this. Licking its chops, looking for something. In human beings, if you snort cocaine, that's what it does. It activates this system. That's the most direct consequence of snorting cocaine, is it activates this system. And it makes you mildly optimistic, sort of active, a little bit sexy, and, interactive, and like, I'm going to go to the party. Something's going to happen. I better be there. I think I might score tonight. That kind of feeling. Cruising, foraging, looking for a good time. Let's see, something might happen. It's out there. It's cool. That's what that system does. It's a desire system. It's a wanting system. It's a seeking system. The best theory that we have about that system, which is not controversial, this system's been studied in other animals galore. We know what happens with that system. You activate that system, it makes the animal look out into the world to find the objects that it needs to satisfy its desires. It's activated by the hypothalamus. Here we have things called need detectors. They monitor the state of your bodily economy. Do you need salt? Do you need sugar? Do you need water? Do you need to move to a different temperature environment? Are you randy? All those things. It registers them. And then it says, doesn't matter what you want, whatever you want, it's out there. So first thing we've got to do about this state of need that we're in the hypothalamus, is send it to the ventral tegmental area, which will activate the seeking system, which is a non-specific, objectless desire system. It just makes you go out and think, whatever I need, I know it's not inside of me, sadly, It's out there in the world. That's how the world works. That's why life's difficult. We can't narcissistically gratify ourselves. We have to find objects. So whatever your need is, which is putting you in a state of desire, just go out there. It's going to be there. And hope for the best. That's what that system does. Panksepp calls it a goad without a goal. And he's not a psychoanalyst. He didn't even know anything about psychoanalysis when, in the 1970s already, he was beginning to unpick what this system does in our mammal cousins. Does the same thing in us, as I said. We know from. I see. I'm going. Am I going over time? I am. Hey, 3:30. So I'll round this off before we have a break, and then we'll come back to it. What that research showed. And there's a hell of a lot else that we've built on that since then. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, But I've told you the crux of the story, which is that if you do neuropsychoanalytic research, that is to say, the first type I've told you is the main type. But this type of research supplements it. Here's another way of looking at the thing. So now here we've taken a core function of the mind that's theoretically relevant to us in psychoanalysis, and we've taken human beings who we can talk to, and we say, what's your subjective experience? Are you dreaming? And what is the brain structure that's lesioned that leads to those who say, no, they're not dreaming, it's there? Once we know that's the part of the brain that generates dreams, we can use all these other neuroscientific methods to absolutely cement it. You have pharmacological probes, single-cell recordings, microdialysis. We've also done functional imaging. It's beautiful. We've done PET studies, PET scans of the brain while it's dreaming. That part of the brain, the seeking system, it lights up like a Christmas tree. It's beautiful. You can see it. So all these things all show the same thing. That's the part of the brain that's making the dreams. There are a few other things that it shows which I can't resist quickly telling you, which is that there's then a regressive activation of perceptual systems. And the frontal convexity, the frontal lobes, which is where the thinking, rational, reality-orientated bit is, which we've spoken about in relation to those two patients previously, that's where you go to sleep. Massive deactivation of the reality-orientated part of the mind, massive activation of the drives of this libidinal, seeking, searching, wanting desire system, this goad without a goal, this objectless desire system, and that's when you dream. So dreaming occurs when the executive functions, what we call ego functions, and we call them ego functions not speculatively. We have shown that lesions there, from the neuroanalytic method that I mentioned earlier, lesions there lead to ego deficits. I've shown you, I've told you about cases with frontal lesions. That's what happens. The shift between their ego and their id is shifted in favor of the id. I've showed you that already. So now, another method says, and guess what? With dreams, it's the same. So now we found this is the part of the brain that goes to sleep. It's the part of the brain we would have predicted is the part that goes to sleep. It fits with our theory, and we now know, okay, prefrontal cortex. Let's just call it for short the ego. Let's just call this secondary process. Let's just say this is the inhibitory pole of the mind. We rough and ready, but we know that's roughly where it is. And it fits with everything else we know about that part of the brain. That's what it does. Let's call this part the libidinal drive. Let's call this something like what Freud called the libidinal drive. It's a rough and ready concept. It's a pretty old-fashioned concept, but at least we know that we can ground there. And guess what? It does exactly what it's supposed to, according to our dream theory. So we start to feel secure. Now we know our dream theory is much more likely to be right. That's the benefit of neuroscience. We know which brain structures are the correlates of our dream theory, and they're also the correlates in relation to the other aspects of our theory. For example, in psychosis, which Freud said, is the ego being overwhelmed by the id. That's the crux of what a psychotic symptom is, and it fits with what we see. When you do the imaging of patients who are having psychotic hallucinations, as David Silbersweig has done, it looks exactly like the brain that's dreaming. The dopamine system, big time activated, frontal lobes, big time deactivated. With dreaming, the visual cortex is activated. In psychotic hallucinations, it's the auditory cortex. That's the difference. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. So there's a lot more I still want to say to you, but that's like rounding off this part about dreams.
Do you have to say what
Oh, so what did Hobson say? Yeah, so I said to him, Alan, you owe Freud an apology. Not only is the basis of your rejecting him wrong, but what we found is right about what's going on in the brain when we dream, fits exactly with what Freud said. So he was like that. So then I go back to London. Those days I was still living in London. I go back to London. Strews God, I couldn't believe my eyes. I've kept it. It's an historical document. He sent me an email. And in the email, the great Alan Hobson, who for 20 years dominated sleep and dream science, the professor of neurophysiology at Harvard, a truth-loving, he says, Mark, thanks very much for coming to Harvard. It was really very interesting what you said. I have to admit your data is very solid. And, in fact, I've heard from so-and-so and so-and-so, they found the same thing. And I just heard about Mackay's imaging study, which had just then been done. And Brown also showing that the system, which I said the lesion said it's there, now they've showed on the scans that that's the one that's activated. It really does look as if you're right. I am prepared to support what you're saying, he said. I, Alan Hobson, am prepared to support it, to concede the point. But did I hear you right that you said you think your findings support Freud? Because I'm afraid if you're going to argue that, then I'm not going to support your findings. Bargaining. Now, he wanted to bargain with me about, as long as I don't say that this is good for psychoanalysis, then he's prepared to accept it. But if I'm going to say, we've been unfair to psychoanalysis, then you're not one of us. And, then I'm going to just lie. Yeah. But it ended in tears for him. And this is the concluding sentence. There is a huge conference every second year in Arizona. It's called the Tucson Consciousness Congress. They have like 2,000 or 3,000 neuroscientists come there to discuss, the latest state of the art of what have we learned about brain mechanisms of consciousness. So they invite Alan Hobson and me to debate our respective views of the dreaming brain. This was in 2006. So I said, okay, great. So, I'll argue for my view of it. Alan argues for his view of it. Then we can have our assembled colleagues, the neuroscientists of the world, can decide. I mean, you rarely get a moment like that, where you actually have a vote, by your peers to say who's right and who's wrong. And I really felt I'm right. So great. And even Alan I secretly knew I was right because he'd admitted it. So Alan Hobson says, no, I won't debate him on that. You know what this guy's doing? He's a crypto-Freudian, he says. What he's doing is he's taking his findings and he's saying they support Freud. I don't want to debate my findings and his findings. I want to debate Freud's findings. So, he's trying to make me look ridiculous to my neuroscientific colleagues and say, I believe in a 1900 theory. Alan's modern theory, I don't want it to also war Brandwach, sort of, my mentality. So finally, the compromise was, okay, what we'll do is we'll debate whether Freud's dream theory has any scientific credibility today. I will defend it on the basis of my findings, and Alan will attack it on the basis of his findings. So that was the debate. Oxford rules. The vote went. It was one of those beautiful moments, where you wait and then you see. The vote went. Remember what I said about 1975? In the American Psychiatric Association. Well, this one went 2-1 against Alan Hobson and for the Freudian dream theory. So the assembled neuroscientists, by the many, many hundred, voted in 2006 that they made a mistake in 1975 and that the Freudian dream theory still has scientific credibility today. Now, of course, I wasn't arguing that Freud was right 100%. I was saying, you owe him an apology because the basis on which you said he was wrong was itself wrong. And in fact, the findings are pretty compatible with him, so we haven't proven him wrong. And in fact, it's pretty darn interesting that, Freud, by this strange old method of his, came to the idea that behind this there are, really urgent, primitive biological desires behind dreams. That's what the contents of dreams ultimately led him to conclude. And there's nothing in the brain more than this system that coincides with that. This is the brain's desire system. This is the,
Can you write the name again first?
What?
That little blue.
it's called, well, many people call it by different names. The various names are, Rolls calls it the reward system. Berridge calls it the wanting system. And these are like really mainstream basic neuroscientists, and Panksepp calls it the seeking system. Okay, so I'll round off after our break. I'll say a few more sort of mopping up sort of things, and then we'll move on to the final topic. Firstly, the clinico-anatomical method with working analytically with neurological patients. I think it's a method which supplements the psychoanalytic method. It incorporates it and supplements it. Lesion studies of the kind that I described in relation to dream theory, that's another method. And remember, I showed you that after we did the lesion studies, then we did a whole lot of other studies to test things which couldn't be determined just by the lesion method. So we did the single-cell recordings, we did the pharmacological probes, we did the microdialysis, we did the functional neuroimaging, all of that. And the more that the different methods, each one of them can answer a question in a way that another method can't, we're getting further and further away from the analytic method. But why I prioritize the method I told you about first is because I think we've got to start there, because that's where we're on the most secure ground psychoanalytically. And then we supplement it with a neuroscientific method that's simultaneous with the analytic one. That's secure. But it's still, it's got its strengths and its weaknesses. So then there are things that we can then do with these other neuroscientific methods, but at least now we know which analytical process we are researching neuroscientifically, because in the first method, we determined what the neural correlates of that psychoanalytical thing, which we can only observe in the analytic setting, are. And then that enables us to then study that thing. But always we should come back. Always we should come back to the psychoanalytic situation again and say, okay, now let me use the psychoanalytic method again and see, does it square? What I can see psychoanalytically, does it square with what I've observed neuroscientifically? And the same applies to neuroscience, plain and simple. There's a great deal that's being learnt in neuroscience all the time these days, which is apparently of relevance to psychoanalysis. A whole lot of claims are being made all the time about how the mind works, sometimes claims which don't fit so squarely with our psychoanalytical hypotheses. That does not mean that therefore we must abandon our psychoanalytic hypotheses, because, we're not sure. That observation has been made in purely neuroscience, like in the case of the early REM research. It's purely neuroscientific research. It doesn't stand by itself as some kind of highest court of appeal which takes priority over psychoanalytical observations. But you do need to take account of it, question your theory, and then test it. And what we're trying to do in neuropsychoanalysis is that. But the important thing is all the time to test it, to come back to test it. And the psychoanalytic method has to take pride of place in, if there is a final court of appeal, it has to be the psychoanalytic situation where we can directly observe, as closely as we can, the inner world, the subjective mental life, which is the subject matter of psychoanalysis. The things that I've told you so far, the two cases, the dream research, and then some of the things that fanned out from the dream research which become researchable because of the dream research, like, okay, if this is the libidinal drive, and if this is the ego which inhibits the libidinal drive, then in psychosis where we consider there to be this relationship between these two things, we must see that. Do we see it? The drive must be increased, the ego function must be decreased. And so, you can gradually build up a picture. But all the things I've told you so far, and there's a great deal besides that I haven't told you because, we have very limited time, all of those things are gratifyingly consistent with our basic psychoanalytical models. So, in fairness, and also to illustrate this other aspect of neuropsychoanalysis, I now want to move on to findings which come from neuroscience, plain and simple, which are not driven by psychoanalytical observations at all, not linked to psychoanalytical theories at all, but they seem to be relevant to psychoanalysis. I want to tell you some of these findings. I'm going to focus on one particular area, but I want to tell it to you in the spirit of these are things that we need to hold in our minds and take back to our psychoanalytical consulting rooms. And here I don't mean our neuropsychoanalytical consulting rooms. We can take it back to our ordinary psychoanalytical work, and we can say, here's a different view. Let me have an open mind, because I'm a psychoanalyst. We have open minds. Let me go back to my analytical method, and let me see, maybe this new theory, maybe it fits better with what we're seeing analytically than the old theory did. I think that's the only correct way for us to proceed. So I'm showing you ways in which we can start pure psychoanalysis with neurological patients, studying psychological processes that are core to our theory in neurological patients, and then even in other animals. And then there's pure neuroscientific observations, and then we come full circle back to psychoanalysis, and let's see, what can we make of those in psychoanalysis? All of this is neuropsychoanalysis, but I've told you how I think the hierarchy works in terms of what's more or less relevant and important. So what I would like to do with this final session is to tell you something about what is being learnt, has been learnt in the neurosciences over the last 20 years about instinctual drives, about emotions, instincts, and drives in the brain. We've learnt an enormous amount. And I've ended my dream seminar session telling you about one of them. I told you about the libidinal drive, and I've told you something of what we've learned in neuroscience about the libidinal drive. And I've shown you why I think we can actually now relate that to what we call the libidinal drive. And it works, it's gratifying in the extreme that such a thing exists, first of all. Also in neuroscience, that is not something to be overlooked. It's fundamentally important. There is no way that is an intuitive, expectation that the brain should have in it a mechanism which is this objectless desire system, which no matter what your need is, it gets generated through the same system, which then looks for satisfaction in the world. And there can be one thing that stimulates it and another thing that satisfies it, if you see what I mean. All of that is basic libidinal drive theory, which we were led to early on in psychoanalysis. And it was very important to our whole theory of sexuality, to a whole way that we understand the relationship between objects and drives and everything. It's like really, really important. To have independent confirmation from the neurosciences that such a thing exists in the human brain and in the mammalian brain in general is fundamentally important. But they also have learned other things about drives in the mammalian brain, which don't all fit so neatly with our psychoanalytical drive theory. And those are the things I want to tell you about. Not because they're right and we're wrong, but because we owe it to ourselves to consider these things and to think about our analytical material in the light of what they found. We don't only want to look at what agrees with us. That's not science. That's a different kind of fundamentalism. You don't want to look, and we were accused of that, of only looking for confirmatory cases. If you only look at the evidence that confirms your hypothesis, doesn't mean that your hypothesis is right. You have to look for evidence which disconfirms your hypothesis. Like Freud, incidentally, did in that famous paper called A Case of Homosexuality in a Woman, where he shows that the patient didn't present the way that his theory of homosexuality predicted. And it problematized. That was a problem for him. He could see that. Hang on, my theory is wrong here. Let me look again. And and that's something that certainly pervaded Freud's way of thinking. And I think that it's sort of sadly not as well respected as it was in the very early days of our field. With these advances in neuroscience and with the advent of neuropsychoanalysis, we have new possibilities of coming back and looking critically at some of our cherished theories. Now, there are many things I could tell you that have emanated from the neurosciences which I think do problematize psychoanalytical theories. There are many things. I'm just choosing this one because it flows naturally from what I said about dream theory, also because it's pretty fundamental. Drive theory is pretty fundamental to psychoanalysis. Freud started, as we all do, at the mental surface, at what's manifest. And then he worked below that to the preconscious fantasies, and then below that to inferences about the unconscious and how it works, and laws about this part of the mind. And then behind that, he made the deepest inferences, which is, what are the fundamental drives that get us going? And he initially said, well, there could be any number. I'm really not sure. And there might be a drive for hamburgers and another drive for donuts. But let's try and consolidate all of this, and let's just sort of say, okay, there's a drive which is self-preservative. That's called the ego drive. And there's a drive which seems to not be for you, but rather for the species, which is the libidinal drive. And they can work against each other. Sometimes something that gives you pleasure is not in your own self-interest in terms of self-preservation. And he said this is the source of the great conflict between sexuality and reason. It's a conflict which ultimately we can reduce to these drives. But he was never really sure, and then eventually he changed his mind. And he said, no, actually I was wrong. The self-preservative drives and the libidinal drives are not in conflict with each other. These are, in fact, two aspects of a single drive, which I'm now going to call the life drive, and it's just a matter of whether it's narcissistic or object-related. So what was previously called self-preservative instincts now become the life drive cathecting the ego, as opposed to what he previously called the sexual instincts, which is the life drive cathecting objects. And it's not quite as simple as that, but you all know what I'm talking about. And then he said, then there's this other drive that I didn't recognize before, which works against both of those in combination, and that we call the death drive. And that's the drive theory that he then had. And if you read that paper in 1920, he said, shit, I'm not sure, but that's the best I can come up with. And he says there, drive theory is in one sense the foundation of psychoanalysis, because it's the most fundamental, like these are the basic forces that drive the mind. But on the other hand, it's the most uncertain aspect of psychoanalysis, because as I said when I talked about these levels of inference, it's the furthest removed from the clinical data, from what you can observe. I mean, a patient doesn't say, I think I got a death drive, doctor. They say, I want to kill the bastard. And then it's a whole complicated thing of trying to see, well, what lies behind that? And there's the whole life of that person that lies behind that. And then ultimately you come to this thing, well, this is the death drive. But it's very far removed from our data, and therefore it's very insecure, and Freud admitted it even in 1920 when he came up with his final drive theory. And there he said, one day biology will give us new answers. Biology is truly the land of unlimited possibilities. There are undreamt of opportunities that will come from that land, etc., etc. But we're not there yet, and for the moment this is the best that we got, and so we shouldn't be ashamed of it. But, he said, what will come from biology in respect of these things may blow away the artificial structure of all our hypotheses in relation to the drives. That's what he said. So I'm bringing you back to where I started today and reminding you, this was Freud's view, and especially in relation to drive theory. One of the reasons to focus on drive theory is as far removed as it is from our observational data, from the stuff of a psychoanalytic session. It's very close to the surface of neuroscientific data. Let me remind you what Freud said a drive was. He said a drive, which Strachey translated as an instinct is a measure of the demand made upon the mind to perform work by virtue of the connection between the mind and the body. Okay, so the body needs something, so it makes a demand on the mind to do something about that need. That was Freud's definition of what a drive is. Okay. By virtue of the embodied nature of the mind, its bodily processes are the origins of drives. And even in the second drive theory, it's an extremely biological speculative theory. If you read it again, you'll see. I mean, it's really biological. It goes all the way back to protozoa, It goes back to the origins of life, when molecules first organized themselves into this new form that we call a living substance. Then we introduced the problem of the life drive, which was opposed by this inert tendency, which is called the death drive. It's all biology, but it's wildly speculative biology. And if the drives are the connection between the body, that is to say the visceral body, the metabolic, autonomic, endocrinological body, and the mind, that is to say the brain, then as difficult as it is to get from the experience of being a brain all the way down to what the hell the bodily processes are that are impacting upon it, when you look at the body itself, you can see. Oh, I see now. I've got a method, that's able to measure these hormones, able to measure these peptides, able to trace these nerve fibers. Let's see. So when you're in a state of desire, where does it come from? I've already told you where it comes from. There are need detectors in the hypothalamus. They're simple mechanisms. They regulate all these things that your body needs, and it gets the seeking system going. And the seeking system then looks out in the world for pleasure. So the fact that I could tell you that in a way that carries such simple conviction is an illustration of what I'm saying about the value of neurobiology in relation to things like drives. We can study them directly, easily. So now that we can, we better listen to what they're telling us, because they've got a method that's much better at looking at drives than our method is. That doesn't mean, I repeat, that that's the final word on the matter. But I do think that we owe it to ourselves as self-respecting, evidence-based discipline, that we should look at our evidence again in the light of those findings. Okay, so I've told you already about this drive system, which we call the wanting system, or the seeking system, or the reward system. I'm going to now draw in black to try and differentiate it. In fact, I think I'll draw a new one. Here's our old brain again. Same old guy. I've told you about this one. It starts here. Well, now I'll draw it in blue. It starts here in the ventral tegmental area. It sends fibers through the lateral hypothalamus. They loop around, and they terminate on a thing called the nucleus accumbens over there. That's what they do. It also goes elsewhere. Goes down here, goes up there, but this is the main bit. In the hypothalamus, there are need detectors. The need detectors activate the seeking system. The seeking system looks into the object world for satisfaction of those drives. But it's called a wanting system. This is important. I've told you how it works in all the lower mammals. I'm not going to repeat all of that. This foraging, seeking, appetite sort of thing. But it's a wanting system. It's not a pleasure system, which is why we don't like, people in my school of thought in the neurosciences don't like Rawls's word reward system. Because in fact, the reward bit of it is a separate system. And I'm going to tell you about that now. This is a wanting system. It's not a liking system. And Berridge makes that distinction. And Panksepp accepts it. And there's a very good evidence for it. And a very good illustration of it in our experience is addiction. Addiction makes you want something. It doesn't mean you like it. And I'm a pathetic example of it. I don't like smoking. I imagine, every time I want a cigarette, I imagine the Marlboro Man and the horse and the sunset and, it's lacquer. But the actual experience of it makes me nauseous and dizzy and sick. And I know it's going to kill me. And it gives me migraines. So, I don't like it. I don't enjoy it, honestly. I think I'm going to enjoy it. That's this expectancy, curiosity, expectancy, wanting, desire, appetite, and all of that. But the actual experience isn't pleasurable. And I'm not going to go into a whole thing about this. I just want to tell you that there is a huge, huge field of research on addiction which focuses on this system, because that's how it works. That's why it's called the self-stimulation system as well, but I'm not going to go into all of that. That's not the only brain mechanism of addiction, even at this basic drive level, and I'll come back to that just now. But this is a big-ticket item in addiction, especially in cocaine addiction, in amphetamine addiction, in alcohol addiction, in nicotine addiction, and those are the main ones. Not in morphine addiction and so on. I'm going to come to that just now. So that we know, that we correlate with our libidinal drive, and we're very happy. It's wonderful that there is a thing in the brain that works like this. When the seeking system, it just seeks, it just looks for any old thing, as I told you, anything. And then it takes whatever it can get, and then it consummates its desire. It says, okay, let's try this thing, or whatever the thing is, and then if it satisfies your need, the need which started the thing in the first place, then that means that the need detector, your bodily state is changed. That was the right thing That was the right stuff. It's what Freud called an experience of satisfaction. The seeking system stops seeking. If you haven't found the thing that you wanted, the need carries on stimulating the seeking system, and you carry on anyway. Okay. But then you learn with those things that do satisfy your needs, you learn that's a good thing. Next time I have this feeling when I go seeking and I see that thing, I know from experience that's the thing I want. So you start to have representations of objects, the object of your desire. And that's an ego function, and it's learning, and it's built over this system. The pleasure is generated in the nucleus accumbens and other septal and other basal forebrain nuclei around here. And this then projects down into a system here called the periaqueductal gray, which generates the pleasure. Lekker, you know? And it's endorphin-driven. Opiate. It's the release of opiates, which are just like, okay, cool. You know, that's really nice. It's a different chemistry, even from the wanting system, is the liking system, as Berridge calls it. The reward system really applies to that. This is the wanting rewards. That's the getting reward system. But all of that's fine. There's no difficulty with that. We can easily fit that with our psychoanalytical theory. But now, the same kind of evidence that led us to recognize that this system exists, that same kind of evidence has led neurobiologists to conclude that there are several other drives or instincts, depending on what you want to call them. They are basically all pretty bad. This is the good one. This is the good one, which is I need something, so I go out into the world in the positive expectation that I'm going to find what I need, and if I get it, then the second system gives me pleasure, and it switches off the need, and I feel satisfied, I feel satiated, I feel consummated in my desire, and I learn which are the good things in the world. But as you all know, there are also bad things in the world, and those are the things that get in the way of your desire. And those sort of things are the other people's desire, you know, which competes with your desire, or the other creature's desire where you are the object of their desire, and they might want to just eat you up because they're also seeking something, and so on. Those are the kinds of things that I mean by the bad things that can happen in life. And there is, just as this system evolved eons ago, because as I said, all mammals have it, even little rats have this. You know, so it evolved eons ago for very good reasons, and I told you already what they are. If you need something that's out there in the world, don't sit here. Go out there looking for it. That's where you're going to find it. That's why the system evolved. Because there's certain expectable things that can go wrong, and you don't want to have to learn it all for yourself for the first time, that when a lion comes at you to eat you, you've got to think, wow, what's that? You know, let me see. Let me suck it and see. You know, that's going to be the last thing you ever experience, and you're going to be a goner. So in the early evolutionary stages where our mammalian brains were being formed, the natural selection thing worked like that. It said, well, let's try various things, you know. Let's make a few mammals that look and see what happens when lions come at them. And let's make a few mammals that run like hell when lions come at them. You know, those are the genetic variation. The ones who said, let's suck it and see, they died. And they didn't reproduce. The ones who said, whenever I see a lion, I don't know why, I'm just going to run. Those ones survived and reproduced. And so the mammals that then carry on the line are the ones who've got an instinct. That is a genetically hardwired, built-in tendency to act in a certain way. And that instinct we call the fear system. We call it the fear-anxiety system. And it has its center here in the lateral nuclei of the amygdala. And we all got amygdala, and amygdalas are jolly good things. And when you see there's certain hardwired fear situations, and I'll give you examples in a minute, you don't need to think. You just know, this is bad, I'm out of here. Or I freeze. Those are the two possibilities. And it's not just us humans. No, not fight. I'll come to that. This instinct works like this in all mammals. When the object of fear comes at you, you either stay put and hope it doesn't see you, or you bolt. Those are the two things that you do. Freezing or fleeing. And this system, when it's activated by one of those objects, that's what it makes you do. And there's a whole hardwired thing. Your heart rate changes in a certain way. Your breathing changes in a certain way. Your blood from your guts goes to your muscles because that's where you need it. So you get jippo guts. All those sort of things are hardwired. This is the fear system. And the muscles enable you to run if you have to. I'll give you an example like field mice. When they're born, you'd go over them like this with an object of a certain size at a certain speed. That's roughly the size and speed of a predatory bird. You go like this over a newly born little field mouse. Either it freezes or it bolts for cover. Has never seen a bird. Knows nothing about birds. Knows nothing about nothing. That's a built-in instinct. And it's there. And that's there from field mice all the way through. You take a domestic mouse. It's born. You put in its cage one hair of a cat. It's never seen a cat. It doesn't know what's a cat. But you put one hair of a cat in its cage, it freezes. Okay? You put two cages there. In one of them, you put a cat hair. In the other one, you put nothing. It will always go into the one without the cat hair. Mice hate cats. You all know that. They don't have to learn it. And we know now why they don't have to learn it. Because if you're the first mouse to come and see, ooh, this is interesting. My seeking system has found a cat. It'll be the last thing you ever seek. Because you'll be a goner and you won't reproduce and your genes will be removed. And that instinct will quickly not become an instinct anymore. That's how they work. So this is a very good thing to have. That's how it works. It goes through the hypothalamus down into the periaqueductal gray. They all go down into the periaqueductal gray. The periaqueductal gray has columns, 2 columns. The one lot make you feel pleasure. The other lot make you feel unpleasure. The ones that make you feel pleasure make you approach. The ones that make you feel unpleasure make you avoid. If you're a mammal, we are mammals, all of us. This anatomy is absolutely identical in all mammals. Same nuclei, same connections with other nuclei, same neurotransmitters coursing through them, and the same neuropeptides, which are very highly focused hormones that operate in very specific parts of the brain and make very specific feelings. They operate in these systems in the identical way in all of us. So, you take this amygdala and you stimulate it, which we've done. Penfield, Wilder Penfield did it. He opened the brain of human beings because he had to do an operation. And he said, let me see what happens if I stimulate the amygdala on its lateral surface. And what he found was they said, oh my God, shit, I feel scared, I feel trepidatious, I feel as if a great big wave's going to come and hit me. And there's oodles of evidence, you can go and read it. Wilder Penfield, beautiful stuff. In human beings too, you stimulate this, they feel fear. That's what they feel, trepidatious fear. Temporal lobe seizures, the complex partial seizures, which are so common. They're so common in this part of the brain. That's why they come with anxiety. The seizure is like a high anxiety is how it starts. Because that's what happens if you stimulate the lateral amygdala. So what I'm telling you, I'm not just telling you it's in all mammals. I'm telling you it's in all mammals, including us, and there's evidence for it. That there's a hardwired fear-anxiety system built into us, and I think we need to take account of that. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. In the mesial amygdala, the amygdala is made up of different nuclei. In the mesial amygdala, there is a different system. It's called the anger-rage system. You stimulate that system, and you feel hot aggression. You feel rage. And you want to, and if you're, and all mammals, it has the same behavioral stereotypes that it releases. The baring of the teeth is one of the things that it does. The raising of the forelegs is another thing that it does. The releasing of your claws, if you've got them. In our case, we've just got fists. But many mammals have claws, and they come out when you stimulate the mesial amygdala. And the hair on the back goes up. Piloerection, it's called. And it's a forward-approaching, attacking maneuver with that particular facial expression, and it's in us too. It's the mesial amygdala. That's how it works. And it's got fibers that go like this into the periaqueductal gray. So when you said flight or fight, that's the switch, flight or fight. So the flight one, it's flight fear, or freeze fear. Or alternatively, there's fight, which is another reaction that you might have, and it's hardwired. But all of these hardwired systems, just as I told you, this system here learns from experience what are good things. So too, there's a hardwired system. It's given by our evolution, by our genetics, but then you add to it. And so you classify the world according to which are the things that belong together with fear. From learning, like there is no instinct for electric sockets. You stick your finger in an electric socket and you get a shock. That's how you know that they're bad things. Now you attach them to your fear system. The next time you see an electric socket, you don't stick your finger in it. Because now it's been associated with the fear system. And it becomes, and you see it. And we've done millions of experiments and we see that's what happens. You give the rat a shocking experience in a cage, it had no reason to know that's a bad place. But the next time you put it into that cage, the lateral amygdala lights up, because now it's learnt this is a bad place. This is a bad object. This is a paranoid object. This is an object I should feel I'm under threat in the face of, and you've learnt that from experience. Same happens with the anger-rage system. These systems are hardwired only for the most basic sort of things. There's certain very, very crude stimuli which activate them in all of us, depending on which species of mammal we are, and then we add to them. We fill in the blanks by early experience. If you get distorted early experience, you're going to end up in big trouble. So if your mother says, don't worry, it's nice while she's putting out cigarettes on you, saying, this object who's good says that's good, but it feels bad, and God alone knows what happens then. What kind of object you're going to attach to your fear system and to your pleasure system. Just to put it really crudely, this is an example of what can go wrong in your classification of the world into good and bad. But please note, so far already I've begun to show that as far as the instinctual wiring of the brain is concerned, it seems as if they're not only good objects and bad objects, they're different types of bad objects. Basically classified already before you're born that there are anger, rage bad objects, and there are fear, anxiety bad objects. Anger, rage, bad objects, you try to annihilate them. That's what you do. You go for it, and you try to destroy it. And there's a particular feeling that goes that, which is, I'm going to get the fucker. I'm going to destroy him. That's the feeling, and that's the behavior that goes with it. And you don't have to learn it. It's there. You just need to learn what to attach it to. Those are bad objects, in brackets, anger, rage. Okay? And then you learn about those other ones. These are bad objects, in bracket, fear, anxiety. And you do very different things. You avoid those ones. You freeze or you flee.
They're in the same.
They will always remain. Those associations will always remain. Unconsciously, they cannot be undone, ever. But I'll tell you what I mean by that later, and I'll show you the evidence for it. But I will tell you now already that we have shown in oodles of experiments that the learning of fear responses operates unconsciously. There are two systems that feed into the amygdala. That feed into the fear response, into the fear aspects of the amygdala. The one they call the quick and dirty pathway. And that doesn't go through neocortex, it doesn't go through consciousness-generating structures. It's just, here's the object, here's the fear. Next time I see that object, even though I won't remember why, I will fear it. I don't need to remember the experience. Like a post-traumatic stress response where the hippocampus is not functioning because of cortisol, so you can't remember it. But the amygdala is functioning perfectly well, and so it learns this is a bad thing, I'm now going to feel fear, but you will never remember why you're feeling the fear. More clinically relevant than that is that in earliest childhood, the first 2 years of your life, your hippocampus hasn't myelinated yet. So you can't lay down conscious memories. But you can have bad experiences. So you learn a hell of a lot of your fear responses in the first 2 years of your life, and you are incapable ever of knowing why you fear those things. You just unconsciously have a connection between that and fear, and all you consciously feel is fear without knowing why. Also important to mention in terms of clinical relevance is that these structures, just like the shape of your ears and the color of your hair and all of that, these things vary. You can be born with big ones or small ones. So there's also temperamental differences in terms of how strong or weak these different systems are. And there are gender differences too. Okay, I'll tell you it toward the end, okay? So gender differences and can you overcome them? Now, something interesting. This area here, there, is called the anterior cingulate gyrus. And there's a system here that goes through the septal nuclei and other diencephalic regions down into the periaqueductal gray. And we call this the panic anxiety system, as opposed to the fear anxiety system. Okay, I'll tell you that after. Now, this system is also an anxiety system, but it's not the same as that anxiety system. It is not stimulated by threat to your bodily integrity. I'm going to be attacked. Paranoid anxiety. This type of fear, this type of anxiety in neurobiology they call panic anxiety or separation distress or depressive anxiety, if you will, as opposed to paranoid anxiety. And it's very interesting that there are two different brain mechanisms for anxiety which coincide with anxiety about loss as opposed to anxiety about attack. This is anxiety related to the loss of an attachment object. It evolves in all mammals. It's the price that we pay for our family structure as mammals. In earliest childhood, when you're born, the system is extremely active. It's activated by oxytocin at birth, in both the mother and the baby, in all mammals. The oxytocin opens that system up, and it says, who's here that I have to attach to? You know? And I'm open to attachment. I want to make a bond here. That's what the oxytocin does. They call it the trust hormone. It's like, who's here? No, I'll just, like, you know, I'll love them. I will connect to them. I'll link to them forever. And in the mother, the oxytocin likewise. There's massive release of oxytocin in childbirth, and then the mother's ready to connect. All being well, the mother will connect with the baby. Why do we have that? It's because we're helpless little creatures, you know, when we're born. And so this system evolved for that reason, that you need to attach to the object that's going to protect you and that's going to feed you in your period of helplessness. How it works is that if you, together with your attachment object, then the opioids that regulate this system are high, and it feels good. Remember I spoke about endorphins earlier in relation to experiences of satisfaction. There are also mu opioids, they're called, which operate on this system, which stay high when you're together with the object of your attachment. If you're a baby or if you're a mother, connect you together. Separate baby from mother, and the level drops. That's how the system works. It's like, now I'm in a panic. And it works over time differently. First, it causes what's called separation distress, and it's called the protest phase. Bowlby called it the protest phase. Now, all neurobiologists use that term. They all recognize this happens in all mammals. The price we pay for the social bond, which protects us, is that we have the pain of social loss. And if you separate the mother and the baby from each other, they both go into separation distress, and they protest. What do? They have distress vocalizations, which in babies go like this. Wah, 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 like that. In little toddlers go, Mommy! Mommy, you lost at me! Mommy! Like this. In the adult, Leon! Where are you? Leon! Leon! You know, protest phase. Separation distress. Panic. Shit! Where is he? You know? Okay. And there's a whole physiology that goes with that. But it doesn't last. In all mammals, it doesn't last. The protest phase is followed by the despair phase. Why do we have a despair phase? We give up. Why do we give up? We give up because it's dangerous for a little mammal to be bleating about its separation. You know? Chip, 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 chip means, you know, here's a little mammal that's lost. Here's a little mammal that's alone. Let me eat it. So you chip, 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 or wah, wah for a while, and then mommy, mommy, and then after a while, you give up. The feeling is, all is lost. I've had it. I don't even try. My seeking system switches off, shut down. The biological purpose is you hibernate, you just stay there, you don't move. And hopefully then you will be found. Because the less you've wandered away from where you started, and the less you've announced profound importance to depression research. That depression is not the pathological form of depression, but first of all, sadness, giving up hope, hopelessness, despair, comes from this system. It's closely related to panic. Oh, and by the way, any psychiatrist will tell you, panic attacks and depression go together. They have what they call comorbidity. Well, now we can tell them why. It's because it's the same system. A panic attack and depressive despair are two different phases in the same system. In pathological depression, we have to assume that something more has happened. Either that you don't know why you're feeling that, or that you're feeling that too much, or that you're feeling that in the wrong sort of place. I'm speaking like a neurobiologist now. That's abnormal. The normal thing is to give up and to feel despair. Eventually, presumably, you get over it. But in depression, which is a pathological version of that, maybe it's overstimulated in early childhood. There is massive evidence that in depression, and I don't mean psychoanalytic evidence, I mean basic, epidemiological evidence, psychiatric evidence. Early separation trauma is a massive predictor of depression. Women are a massive predictor of depression. They get 3 times more likely than men to get depressed. Now, you asked about the gender differences in the brain. Here's one of the big ticket items. This system is 3 times more active in women, on the average, than it is in men. This anger-rage system is 3 times more active, on the average, in men than it is in women. From birth. Do the scan, resting state, 3 times different, this one and this one. Women are more attachment-orientated, they're more socially bonded, they're more nurturant, on the average. And that's the basic mechanism of it, because of oxytocin. Oxytocin is hugely higher in women than it is in men. It's high in women at childbirth, which men don't have. It's also high in women during sexual intercourse, which is when you form another kind of social bond, a bond with your sexual mate that you need to keep close with you to look after the offspring. That's how the instincts were originally designed. In men, oxytocin is also high during sexual intercourse, but only after orgasm. With women, it's throughout sexual intercourse. So there's a difference in the phenomenology that might correlate with that on the average. In men, there's another peptide called vasopressin, which is much higher during the early stages of sexual intercourse and goes down after orgasm. Vasopressin is a persistence, not giving up. Let me try more, like that. It's like a irritating thing. Much higher in men, especially in the early stages of sexual intercourse. In women, it's barely there. They have oxytocin right from the beginning. Now, this panic attacks, by the way, even psychiatrists discovered by accident that if you give them anxiolytics, it doesn't help. Anxiolytics work on this system, this benzodiazepine system. Antidepressants work on that system because the panic attacks have to do with social anxiety, the anxiety of loss of an attachment object, loss of love, as Freud called it. It's a different kind of anxiety from castration anxiety, from paranoid anxiety. This is depressive anxiety, this is paranoid anxiety. They're 2 absolutely discernible systems in the mammalian brain that correlate with those 2 types of anxiety. But very important to recognize that these are instinctual mechanisms. They're there from the beginning. They are, like Freud's early anxiety theory was, if the libido gets too high, then it gets converted into anxiety. I don't know if you remember that old theory. So this shows that that's not right. Okay, if you accept it in this crude form, and remember what I said, this is not the final court of appeal, the last word on the matter. But I think we are obliged to think again about, for example, the attachment to those early objects. It's not related to pleasure-seeking sexual system. It's a separate system. It has to do with safety and security of an attachment object. It's not derivative from this system. It's really That's how it looks. I know it's not so simple. I'm just saying I think it's worth thinking about. It's worth us thinking about. There were analysts like Bowlby and Fairbairn who said there is an independent object attachment system. It's not driven by a sexual drive. And Anna Freud said, ah! So here's some evidence that's interesting. I think that it's worth us thinking about this in relation to our metapsychology. So, yeah. Well, nightmares are a complicated subject in their own right, but the fear-anxiety system, the lateral amygdala, is very activated in nightmares on the average. It's also very activated in PTSD, active symptomatic states of PTSD. This is the whole benzodiazepine system, though. So nightmares and benzodiazepines, to the extent that those things overlap, they do go together. This is a different type of anxiety, depressive anxiety, panic, separation distress, fear of loss, despair, all of those things. Now, I'm speaking about dichotomies. Let me just mention one other one that's of some clinical relevance. When you want to destroy somebody, that anger, rage, annihilation feeling, like, I'm going to get the bastard. That is driven by this anger, rage system. But there's another kind of aggression, which they call predatory aggression or cold aggression, as opposed to hot aggression, which is rage. Cold aggression is not, I don't want to destroy the thing because I hate it. I want to destroy it because I want to eat it. So a lion running after the springbok isn't in a state of rage. It's like, well, I want to eat that thing. So, it's a state of desire. So I think this has interesting implications in relation to rape and psychopathy and, all these sort of things which are worth thinking about. I don't mean reducing to, but it's interesting. What kind of aggression is this in this kind of patient? Is it rage? If we don't see any rage, our natural assumption is, well, it's defended against or it's unconscious, but maybe not. Maybe it's predatory aggression. Maybe it's not anger, rage driven. Maybe it's cold aggression, not hot aggression. There are many chilling things that people do, which I think might be worth thinking about in relation to this, what's the drive theory that's coming out of neurobiology. Now, there is one other, these are really well established, very, very solid evidence, well established that these systems exist in the mammalian brain. I haven't spoken about the maternal care sort of thing, which is preparatory to this system. I've mentioned oxytocin. It seems to be actually a sort of subset of this attachment system, of this panic, sadness system, and so on. But there's another system which is more controversial, which is only now beginning to be sort of unpicked. And it's associated with that chap who I mentioned earlier, Jaak Panksepp. He calls it the play system. Play. And what he observed is that all mammals, when they're young, mammal pups, us included, they do rough and tumble play. And they have to do rough and tumble play. If you prevent them from doing rough and tumble play, they'll do double their amount the next day. There's like a rebound effect. Just like within REM sleep, you deprive somebody of REM sleep, half the REM sleep gone. Next night, they'll get half the REM sleep added. With play, likewise. Take 2/3 of the playtime away from a little mammal today. Tomorrow it'll take 2/3 more playtime to make up the difference. And it's rough and tumble play. The one runs after the other one. Then they turn around, and that one runs after this one. And usually, and I'll come back to that. And also, then they mount on each other. This one jumps on top of that one on its back. And then this one jumps on top of that one on its back. And they giggle. Even rats. This Jaak Panksepp found that the rats laugh. But they laugh subvocally. We can't hear it. Subsonically. What's it called? Subsonic, I think it's called. 40 hertz, I think it is. I don't know. I don't remember the figures. But you have to take this apparatus which, makes us hear it. And then you hear them giggling away, while they're chasing each other, while they're jumping on each other, and the other one is pinning each other down. The one is on the back, and the other one's on top. And then the other one's on the back, and then the other one's on top. And it's a glorious time, and then they run around in circles, and this one jumps on that one, and then that one jumps on the other one. And it stays like that. Great fun, all mammals, so long as you don't break the 60-40 rule, which is a fascinating thing. If the one mammal wants to be on top more than 60% of the time, the other one stops playing. So it's quite happy, even in a certain pair, that even if that one's always at the bottom 40% of the time, and the other one's always on the top 60% of the time, it will tolerate it. But make it 70% of the time, no, not playing no more. And then usually what's activated is anger rage. And the play is gone, and now it's not fun anymore, and now it turns into a fight. And you see it across the mammals. And in humans. Put little kiddies together and let them loose.
I was thinking about humans who submit and the more passive kind of humans and humans who don't play.
Now, the problem with humans I'm going to come to when I get also to the question about can you change it. Humans have one thing that's different. But all of this is the same. It's all there, believe me, beneath the surface, these circuits are there. How it relates to our drive theory and how it relates to our clinical phenomena, that's a complicated topic. But that these systems are there and that this is how they operate, is really pretty much beyond doubt. The other thing that's interesting about this system is that they're studying it in terms of what happens during the maturational process. And it seems as if the same system, this play system, becomes a social dominance hierarchy formation system. And it seems to have something to do with competitiveness and who's going to be on top and who's going to be at the bottom and where you're going to fit into the pecking order. And by the way, speaking of pecking orders, many of these systems, which I've said we have in all of us mammals, they're also in birds. So there seems to be a common evolutionary route that when these systems evolved, it was before mammals and birds separated. So most of what I'm telling you, you also see it in birds. Weirdly. As I say, speaking of pecking orders. So these are the systems, again. A seeking, wanting system, a pleasure-lust system, a fear-anxiety system, a separation, distress, sadness, panic anxiety system, an anger-rage system, and a play-come-social dominance system, which is less certain, less well-studied, less well-understood. There you have it. It's not death drive and life drive. It's lots of different types of bad things that can happen. There's bad panic objects, there's bad rage objects, there's bad fear objects, and there may even be bad dominating me too much objects. And that's what the biological evidence points to. Now, what is different between us and the other mammals is this. This, prefrontal lobes. I've spoken to you most of today about prefrontal lobes in all sorts of connections. I've spoken about them as secondary process systems, reality principle systems, executive ego systems, the sort of overarching control systems. We have this part of the brain much bigger. I mean, like 100% bigger than the lower mammals. Much, much bigger. Rats hardly have prefrontal cortex at all. And then as you go up, the guinea pigs and the rabbits and the squirrels, they have like just about no frontal lobes, a little tiny bit. And then you go up, and then you get the kitty cats and the moo cows and the doggies and all of that sort of stuff, the piggies and all of that. They've got little bits of frontal lobe, and so you go on. Even the whales and the dolphins are not big on frontal lobes. Even the elephants are not big on frontal lobes. Primates are big on frontal lobes. They got about half as much as us. Our pride and joy, the thing that separates us from all the beasts, even the chimpanzees who share more than 99% of their genetic material with us, that little less than 1% difference is expressed largely here in prefrontal lobes. What do the prefrontal lobes do? The prefrontal lobes override these systems. These systems release automatic stereotype behaviors, compulsive behaviors, emotional attacks, if you will, outbursts, compulsive things you got to do. Prefrontal lobes say, I know that you're scared inside of this cage where you got a shock once before because you have an indelible fear association. But you know what? I'm going to override it. And that's what they've shown in experiments time and time again, that in the animals who learn this is a dangerous place, then they make it the best place in the world after that. Every kind of nice thing happens in that cage. Food, sexual partners, comfort, safety and security, everything. So eventually they start sort of like trepidatiously returning there because they have to, because all the good things are there. And then eventually they start to calm down and they're okay. But you do an fMRI scan and you see the amygdala is still lighting up like a Christmas tree. But what's added is prefrontal activation, which is overriding it. So that's why I say unconsciously the association's still there, but it's overridden. And we have massive capacity to override these systems compared to other mammals. This is the part of the brain that evolves. At age 2, you have a big burst of growth, of maturation of prefrontal lobes. Age 5 and 6, another massive burst. Age 13, 14, 15, another burst. Carries on. Early 20s, it's still growing. And there you unite big, fat, juicy prefrontal lobes. That's what makes you human. Makes you able to override these basic systems, makes it difficult for us to see them, you know. And it gives us choice. It gives us what Freud said, that thinking is interposed between drive and action. Thinking is what this thing does. Stop, think. Let me work out what's likely to happen if I do this or this or this or this or this. Okay, I'll choose this. Even though I'm emotively compelled to do that, I know from experience that's not the right thing to do. Or given all the circumstances I'm facing here, even though I feel like doing that, I've worked out that's better. I'll do that. I hate this guy, my headmaster. I want to hit him, but, you know, probably not a good idea. Better not hit him. He's the headmaster. Okay, I won't. You know, instead I'll go and kick the cat. This is what prefrontal lobes allow us to do. Free will seems to be the freedom to not have to act. It's the ability to inhibit instinctual drives and open up all kinds of other possibilities based on the reality principle.